So today we're going to talk with Gina Coplon-Newfield about electric cars. If you care about climate, then transportation is a big nut to crack. It's bigger now in America in terms of emissions than the utility sector, than electric utilities and energy. We have to deal with cars in terms of decarbonization, and America is one of the biggest carbon emitters in the world as a country. So solving this issue of transportation in American vehicles is got to be high priority for global decarbonization and climate change.
And while there are manufacturers who have pledged to phase out the internal combustion engine, that's all voluntary stuff, and who knows if it'll ever really happen. The policy goals have to be strengthened. I mean, with the IPCC report that came out, that's very scary. It is very scary. And the targets and the goals just aren't high enough. They're not strong enough.
Yeah, so the goals are both incredibly ambitious and not enough.
And they're goals, not requirements, not policy yet, right? Not legislation. And it's ridiculous because EVs are awesome. I mean, it is so much cheaper. Once you have the EV, it is absolutely hands down cheaper than buying gas, right? The electricity, even in an expensive electricity state like Massachusetts, it's still way cheaper. And with the good rebates, it's less expensive in a lot of cases to buy an electric car or lease an electric car.
Our cars run on electromagnetic radiation from a nearby star.
That star being the sun, because we have solar panels. Awesome.
Hey, Jeannie.
Yeah, Brew.
Who's our guest on the show today?
This morning, we have Gina Coplon-Newfield. Good morning, Gina.
Hi, Gina.
Good morning.
Gina was the director for many years of the Sierra Club's Clean Transportation for All campaign. What are we talking about? Probably transportation, right?
That is right. So my friend Nick Nigro and his wonderful team at Atlas Public Policy came out with a chart several weeks ago that I thought was fascinating. So this is a chart from EV Hub, or Atlas Public Policy, focused on the electric vehicles market and policies. And it was electric vehicle sales in the United States in the month of May, but it also shows previous sales over the last couple of years. And I found this fascinating. First of all, you'll notice that for the most part, there is an upward trajectory of electric vehicle sales in this country from the last couple of years. So that's good news. You'll also notice that the last 3 months that are listed here, March, April, and May of 2021, you see much higher sales than we've ever had before in the United States. So that is very encouraging. You also notice, if you look closely, you see a purple line at the bottom. It kind of zigzags throughout the bottom. And in May, it lands at about 3.2%. And so what that shows is that 3.2% of all light duty vehicles sold in the United States as of May of 2021 were electric vehicles. And then if you look a little higher, that blue zigzaggy line, which ends at about 13%, shows that 13% of all passenger vehicle sales were electric vehicles in May of 2021. And so there are a couple of things to me that are really interesting about that. One, it shows the portion of vehicles being sold that are electric is going up, whether it's passenger vehicles or light duty vehicles. The other thing I think it reminds us is that the reason there's such a big difference between the 3% and the 13% is because most of the vehicles sold in this country to Americans are pickup trucks, right? So most of the vehicles sold are big vehicles that are not electric. So if you're just looking at the non-pickup truck arena, 13%, that's pretty good. But if you're looking at all light duty vehicles, which includes cars and light trucks, it's still pretty small. It's 3.2%. Now, 3.2% is higher than the 2% that the electric vehicles market has been kind of stuck in the last few years. For a while, the first few years in the market, it was stuck under 1%. And then the last bunch of years, it's been kind of stuck at 2%. So 3%, that's better, but obviously we still have a ways to go to have significant market penetration. It's also, I think, really interesting when you look at this chart to see the fact that that blue chunk, which is Tesla, is getting smaller. So what we saw the first many years of the electric vehicles market in this country was that Tesla was completely dominating, right? So for a long time, Tesla made up more than half of all electric vehicle sales in the United States. They have a number of models on the market and people love them. So that's great. But what's been frustrating for many of us who've been pushing this market for a while is that, there are all these other brands and companies in the marketplace, Ford, GM, Nissan, Toyota, Volkswagen, that were just barely selling any electric vehicles. Now, what's interesting about May of 2021 is that you start to see that change, right? You see that Tesla is actually 27% of all sales in May. So that's still disproportionately high for that company, but it's much lower than it used to be. And that signals a couple of things. One, it signals that Tesla's had a couple of production problems the last few months. They're still selling a lot, but not as many. But it's also showing that other brands and companies are starting to increase. So that includes companies like General Motors, Ford, Toyota, Volkswagen. And I'll actually just share personally that my husband and I just leased a new VW ID4, which is a great vehicle. But while we were searching for our next EV, we test drove a number of different models on the market from General Motors and Hyundai and a few others. And there's some great choices out there.
When Jeannie and I test drove EVs, we were impressed with the vehicles, but underwhelmed with the dealers. I thought the dealers were they wanted to sell us a gasoline car. I mean, most of them. And it was really frustrating and annoying.
Yeah, well, one of the most fun projects I worked on at Sierra Club on that topic was a report that we came up with called Rev Up EVs. So we did one in 2016 and another in 2019. And so we basically recruited hundreds of people to go out and shop for an electric vehicle and then report back on their shopping experience. We were hearing from automakers who were saying, we're doing everything we can to sell electric vehicles, but consumers, they just don't want them. So you need to weaken regulations that, push us to sell more EVs. And we had been hearing anecdotally, people like you are having a really tough time shopping for EVs. The salespeople and the automakers themselves are just making it really tough. So we wanted to get some data. I know you guys love data. So we did. We recruited hundreds of people to shop. We had them fill out a survey. We worked with a statistician to evaluate the data that came back. And not surprisingly, we found that for the most part, both the automakers and the dealers were barely lifting a finger to try to sell these electric vehicles. At most dealerships, there were no EVs on the lot at all. None, not a single one. If there were any, it might be one or two. They were often hidden at the back of the lot. The salespeople often didn't know much about the technology. They didn't talk to the consumers about the charging infrastructure or the tax incentives or rebates to lower the price of these vehicles by thousands of dollars. And so consumers like you were just really struggling to have a good shopping experience. Myself, I've shopped for EVs a few times now. I will say this last time it was a little better. At each of the dealerships we went to, there were more than just a couple EVs on the lot. There weren't a lot, but more than there had been before. The salespeople knew a little bit more about the technology, but there were still a lot of gaps. For example, the place where we leased our VW ID4, the salesperson had no idea that there is a Massachusetts rebate of $2,500, which is a pretty significant incentive that you might want to mention to your customers.
Yep.
So true.
Well, thanks, Gina. Thanks for being on the show. This has been great.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure to chat.